In the quiet suburbs of Millbrook, Connecticut, there lived a woman who understood something most of us never learn.
Emily Hatfield knew that perception is reality.
That image is everything. That if you can control how others see you, you can control everything else. She wasn't born evil. She wasn't a creature of impulse or rage. Emily Hatfield was something far more dangerous. She was brilliant. And she used that brilliance to craft herself into the perfect predator, hiding in plain sight behind silk scarves and charity galas. This is not a story about a monster. This is a case study in how intelligence, divorced from empathy, becomes the most sophisticated form of destruction imaginable. Pause for emphasis. Picture Emily in 1987, standing in her pristine kitchen, morning light streaming through designer curtains. At 42, she had perfected the art of being unnoticed while being admired. Her neighbors saw elegance. Her friends saw grace. But if you looked closer, really looked, you might have caught something else in those pale blue eyes. A calculating coldness that measured every interaction like a chess move. Emily didn't just live her life. She orchestrated it. Every smile was strategic. Every gesture calculated. She had learned early that people wanted to see what they expected to see. The devoted wife, the caring mother, the pillar of the community. So she gave them exactly that performance while her real mind worked in the shadows. Always planning, always controlling. Her husband Marcus often joked that Emily could run a corporation. He had no idea how right he was. Because Emily Hatfield was running something far more complex than any business. She was running a family like a military operation, where every member had a role, and deviation from that role came with consequences. She kept detailed notes about her daughter's behavior, their weaknesses, their fears. She documented which punishments worked best on each child, which rewards motivated them most effectively. To Emily, parenting wasn't about love, it was about optimization. She was engineering obedience with the precision of a scientist studying lab rats. But here's what made Emily truly dangerous. She believed she was doing the right thing. In her mind, she wasn't manipulating her family, she was perfecting them. She wasn't controlling them, she was protecting them from their own inadequacies. This wasn't cruelty. This was love, refined to its most efficient form. And this level of calculated control was just the beginning of her dark genius. Before we dive deeper into Emily's psychological methods, I want to take a moment to connect with you. If you're fascinated by the dark psychology behind seemingly ordinary people who hide extraordinary secrets, you've found your home here. This channel explores the most disturbing family cases through a lens of psychological analysis. Not for shock value, but to understand how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary evil. We examine the minds behind the madness, the systems behind the suffering, and the logic behind the illogical. If you want to join a community that isn't afraid to look into the darkest corners of human nature and ask the hard questions, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, Emily Hatfield's story is just getting started. And what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about maternal love. Now, let's return to our case study and explore exactly how Emily turned her home into a laboratory for psychological control. The Hatfield household operated on what Emily privately called the system. It was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its thoroughness. Every family member had behavioral expectations, clearly defined consequences, and carefully calibrated rewards. Emily monitored everything: phone calls, friendships, academic performance, even private conversations between her daughters. She installed what she called accountability measures throughout the house. Hidden microphones in the girls' bedrooms, cameras disguised as decorative objects in common areas. She told herself this wasn't spying, it was quality control. How could she maintain family excellence without comprehensive data? The psychological brilliance of Emily's approach lay not in punishment, but in the anticipation of punishment. Her daughters never knew when they were being watched, so they had to assume they always were. They internalized Emily's standards until her voice became their inner critic, operating even when she wasn't present. She had mastered what behavioral psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of conditioning known to science. Sometimes Emily would ignore minor infractions, creating confusion. Sometimes she would respond to small mistakes with disproportionate consequences, creating fear. This unpredictability kept her family in a constant state of hypervigilance. always trying to please, never quite succeeding. Clara, her eldest daughter, responded by becoming obsessively perfect. Evelyn, the younger one, became quietly rebellious, which only gave Emily more material to work with. Both reactions served Emily's purposes perfectly. She needed different tools for different situations. What's most chilling about Emily's methods is how rational they seem when viewed through her eyes. She wasn't acting out of anger or sadism. She was applying advanced psychological principles with the detached efficiency of a researcher. She had studied her subjects, identified their behavioral patterns, and designed targeted interventions to achieve desired outcomes. Emily kept detailed journals documenting her family's responses to various stimuli. She tracked which emotional triggers worked best on each daughter. She recorded optimal timing for delivering criticism versus praise. She analyzed their friendships, their romantic interests, their academic performance, all to better understand how to shape their behavior. To Emily, this was simply good management. She would have been genuinely puzzled by anyone who called it abuse. In her mind, she was conducting advanced parenting, using scientific methods to raise superior children who would be prepared for the harsh realities of adult life. But as we'll see, Emily's obsession with control was about to collide with forces beyond even her considerable abilities to manage. The first crack in Emily's perfect system appeared in the spring of 1991, though she didn't recognize it as such at the time. Marcus, her husband of 18 years, had been making increasingly poor financial decisions. The family's comfortable lifestyle was built on a foundation of lies, failed investments, hidden debts, and Marcus's desperate attempts to maintain their social standing through creative bookkeeping. When Emily discovered the extent of their financial ruin, something shifted in her psychology. For the first time in her adult life, a variable had entered her system that she couldn't control. Marcus had introduced chaos into her carefully ordered world, and chaos was intolerable. She spent 3 days in her study, creating what she called solution matrices, detailed analyses of their options, probability calculations, risk assessments. Emily approached their crisis like a management consultant might approach a failing company. What assets could be liquidated? What liabilities could be eliminated? What structural changes would restore operational efficiency? In her neat handwriting, she listed possibilities. Bankruptcy, too damaging to their social position. Downsizing would signal weakness to their peers. Debt consolidation still left them dependent on Marcus's unreliable earning capacity. Then, at the bottom of page 7, she wrote something that would have horrified any normal person, but to Emily seemed like simple logical progression. Remove primary liability. She didn't write kill Marcus. That would have been crude, imprecise. Emily had trained herself to think in euphemisms, to frame even the most extreme solutions in the language of business efficiency. Marcus wasn't her husband anymore. He was a performance liability who had failed to meet basic operational requirements. This wasn't emotional. Emily felt no rage, no betrayal, no hatred. She had simply identified a problem and was developing the most effective solution. Her ability to compartmentalize emotion from analysis had reached its logical conclusion. She could now contemplate murder with the same clinical detachment she might apply to firing an incompetent employee. The plan she developed was characteristically thorough. Marcus had been prescribed anxiety medication following their financial troubles. He had also been drinking heavily. An accidental overdose would be completely believable. A desperate man seeking relief from stress who made a fatal error in judgment. Emily spent weeks observing Marcus's routines, documenting his medication schedule, noting when he was most likely to be alone and vulnerable. She approached his murder like any other project requiring careful planning and precise execution. But what makes Emily's psychology truly chilling is that even as she planned her husband's death, she genuinely believed she was protecting her family. In her twisted logic, Marcus's poor decisions had threatened their security and social standing. By eliminating him, she was eliminating the threat. This wasn't murder, it was damage control. After Marcus's death, which appeared to be a tragic accident involving prescription medication and alcohol, Emily faced a new challenge. The life insurance money would solve their immediate financial crisis, but it wouldn't last forever. She needed sustainable income streams, and she needed them quickly. This is where Emily's story transforms from disturbing to genuinely horrifying. Because now she turned her analytical mind toward her own daughters, evaluating them not as children to be protected, but as assets to be optimized. Clara was 19, beautiful, intelligent, and completely conditioned to seek Emily's approval. Evelyn was 17, equally attractive but more resistant to control. In Emily's new calculus, both girls represented untapped revenue potential. If properly managed, she began what she privately termed market research, discreetly investigating wealthy older men in their social circle. Who was recently divorced? Who had a reputation for appreciating young female companionship? Who had both substantial assets and compromising secrets that could be leveraged for long-term financial security? Emily wasn't planning to prostitute her daughters. That would have been beneath their social class. She was arranging what she called strategic partnerships, marriages or relationships that would provide financial stability while maintaining their family's reputation. The fact that these arrangements might destroy her daughter's emotional well-being was simply an externality she was willing to accept. This represents the complete erosion of Emily's moral boundaries. She had progressed from controlling her family's behavior to controlling their bodies, from managing their choices to selling their futures. But in her mind, this was still protection. She was ensuring they would never face financial insecurity. She was giving them stability, even if they couldn't appreciate it yet. The most chilling aspect of Emily's reasoning is how she had convinced herself that her daughter's suffering was temporary, while the benefits would be permanent. They might feel upset initially, but they would eventually thank her for securing their futures. This wasn't exploitation, it was long-term planning. She had become a master of what psychologists call moral disengagement, the ability to temporarily deactivate ethical standards when they interfere with desired outcomes. Emily could commit atrocities while maintaining her self-image as a loving mother, simply by reframing those atrocities as necessary sacrifices. In her journals from this period, Emily wrote extensively about her daughter's market value and optimization potential. She analyzed their personalities like products being prepared for sale, identifying strengths to emphasize and weaknesses to conceal. The language she used was clinical, businesslike, completely divorced from any recognition that she was discussing her own children's lives. The arrangements Emily made with Harold Fitzgerald and Charles Cavendish weren't transactions in any conventional sense. They were complex psychological operations that required careful orchestration and precise timing. Fitzgerald, a 63-year-old widower with interest in several local businesses, had been watching Clara for months at social events. Emily had noticed his attention and began cultivating it, engineering accidental encounters, ensuring Clara was dressed attractively at community functions, creating opportunities for them to interact. When Fitzgerald finally approached Emily about Clara, she didn't respond with maternal outrage. Instead, she negotiated. What could he offer in exchange for access to her daughter? How would this arrangement benefit the family's long-term stability? What assurances could he provide regarding discretion and ongoing financial support? Emily's genius lay in making these men believe they were the ones in control, while she pulled every string. She presented herself as a pragmatic mother facing difficult circumstances, reluctantly agreeing to arrangements that would benefit everyone involved. She made them think they were exploiting her desperation, when in reality she was exploiting their desires. The psychological manipulation extended to her daughters as well. Emily didn't simply order them to comply. That would have created resistance and potentially exposed her plans. Instead, she shaped their reality gradually, making them believe these relationships were their own choices. She would mention how mature Clara had become, how men like Fitzgerald represented stability and security. She would point out other young women who had married older men and seemed happy. She would express concern about their family's financial future, just enough to make Clara feel responsible for finding solutions. By the time Clara found herself in Fitzgerald's bed, she genuinely believed she was saving her family. Emily had engineered her daughter's destruction while making her grateful for the opportunity. Meanwhile, Emily was simultaneously grooming Evelyn for a similar arrangement with Charles Cavendish, a recently divorced businessman with a taste for younger women and a need for social respectability. Emily had identified his weaknesses, his loneliness, his desire to appear successful, his fear of social judgment. and was methodically exploiting each one. This is where we see the full scope of Emily's psychological sophistication. She wasn't just manipulating individual people, she was manipulating entire social systems. She had turned her daughters into willing participants in their own exploitation, while maintaining her reputation as a devoted mother facing tragic circumstances. The community saw Emily as a widow bravely managing her family's financial difficulties. They admired her strength, her grace under pressure, her careful attention to her daughters' futures. No one suspected that behind the elegant facade was a predator who had weaponized maternal love itself. But even the most sophisticated systems have breaking points. And Emily's carefully constructed world began to collapse when she pushed her manipulations one step too far. Clara had endured 6 months of what Emily euphemistically called her arrangement with Fitzgerald when she began showing signs of psychological breakdown. The cognitive dissonance between her conditioned obedience to her mother and her natural revulsion at the situation had created a mental crisis that even Emily couldn't manage. Clara started having panic attacks. She lost weight, developed insomnia, and began talking about ending her life. These weren't manipulative threats. They were genuine symptoms of severe psychological trauma. Any normal mother would have immediately removed her daughter from the harmful situation. But Emily had invested too much in her system to abandon it now. Instead of protecting Clara, she decided Clara had become a liability that needed to be managed more efficiently. Emily's journals from this period reveal her thought process with chilling clarity. Clara was experiencing adjustment difficulties that were threatening operational security. The solution was to implement corrective measures to ensure system stability. She began increasing Clara's medication without medical supervision, telling her daughter it would help with her anxiety. She isolated Clara from potential support systems, claiming that outside influences were making her condition worse. She gaslighted Clara about her own experiences, suggesting that her memories of trauma were symptoms of mental illness rather than responses to real abuse. When Clara finally worked up the courage to confront her mother directly, threatening to expose everything to the authorities, Emily knew she had reached a decision point. Clara had become not just a liability, but an active threat to everything Emily had built. On a cold October evening in 1992, Clara Hatfield died from what appeared to be an accidental overdose of her mother's prescription anxiety medication. The investigation was perfunctory. A tragic young woman overwhelmed by family financial pressures had taken too many pills while seeking relief from stress. Emily's reaction at the funeral was pitch perfect. Devastated but dignified. Heartbroken but strong for her surviving daughter. She gave interviews about the importance of mental health awareness. She established a small scholarship in Clara's name. She performed grief so convincingly that even she began to believe it was real. But those who knew, Emily best, particularly 17-year-old Evelyn, recognized something else in her mother's eyes. Relief. Clara had become a problem that could only be solved one way, and Emily had solved it with characteristic efficiency. The death of Clara didn't end Emily's system. It refined it. She had learned that direct physical control was messier and more dangerous than psychological control. Going forward, she would rely more heavily on emotional manipulation and social pressure, techniques that left no physical evidence and could always be explained as loving guidance. The final chapter of Emily Hatfield's story isn't about her crimes. It's about her psychology. Because understanding Emily means understanding how someone can convince themselves that destroying their own family is an act of love. Emily wasn't born without empathy. Childhood photographs show a normal little girl with bright eyes and a genuine smile. She had friends, played with dolls, showed typical emotional responses to joy and disappointment. Whatever capacity for love she once possessed didn't disappear overnight. It was gradually eroded by a worldview that prioritized control over connection. She had learned, perhaps from her own childhood experiences, that the world was dangerous and unpredictable. The only way to protect yourself and those you cared about was to control every variable, eliminate every threat, optimize every outcome. This wasn't cruelty. It was love expressed through the language of systems and efficiency. Emily's tragedy is that she was genuinely trying to be a good mother, using the only tools she understood. She wanted her daughters to be safe, successful, and stable. The fact that her methods destroyed them wasn't a failure of intention. It was a failure of understanding the difference between controlling people and caring for them. In her final years, living alone in a modest apartment after Evelyn's suicide and the collapse of her social world, Emily would still speak about her daughters with what sounded like maternal pride. She had given them opportunities. She had protected them from making poor choices. She had prepared them for the realities of adult life. She died, believing she had been a good mother. Emily, Hatfield represents something terrifying about human potential, the capacity for intelligence to become completely divorced from wisdom, for planning to replace compassion, for systems thinking to override human feeling. She shows us how someone can commit the most heinous acts while maintaining a self-image of virtue and care. Long pause. Music becomes very quiet. The genius of Emily Hatfield wasn't in what she did. It was in how completely she convinced herself it was right. She had created a moral framework that could justify any action, a psychological system that could transform love into control and control into destruction. She proved something terrifying about human nature. That intelligence without empathy doesn't just create monsters. It creates monsters who never realize what they've become. Emily Hatfield lived her entire life believing she was the hero of her own story, right up until the very end. And perhaps that's the most disturbing truth of all.